Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Just looking around. Are there any like current students or recent graduates from college or anything around? Cool. Nice to see you guys. This talk isn't, I won't say centered towards you guys, but I hope you'll find it particularly useful, I guess is the best way to put it. So, okay, cool. So as I got introduced, my name is Christopher Ng. I've had about 15 years in IT, not specifically in digital forensic and incident response, but it's kind of where I've kind of brought my interest to, right? I started out doing system administration, development and programming, and all the other stuff. And then I ended up being the CIO over at Gutman Community College. So I don't know if you guys are you students from one of the community colleges and stuff like that? Okay, cool. So it's always nice to see you guys around, so especially John Jay. So as I said, I went back to school actually afterwards to learn about digital forensic science, graduated in 2023. And that left me a bunch of questions after I finished, right? It's like, what did I want to do with this, right? Because the world's your oyster. There's so many areas of digital forensics and incident response, right? The coursework was great and all the
mic right
the,
there.
this one?
Small.
Small? Okay. Yep. Is that good? Or assume you're good? Okay, cool. So before I go on, I just really want to quickly, acknowledge my family. They're actually at a trunk or treat. I was hoping to go to that, but I'm here instead with you all. Hopefully they'll save me some candy and stuff like that. So, and then one last note, right? Works and thoughts are solely my own and not about my employer. I'm not here in the capacity of, from CUNY or Gutman and stuff like that. So just want to get that out of the way. So as I said, why this talk? I had a few questions right after graduation. It's like, where do I go from here was the first one, right? I wanted to know more, right? The classes that we had in there just kind of opened up everything for me. The other option was, how else can I really learn digital forensics and incident response, right? I took the classwork, did a degree, and all the other stuff. A lot of things that people do are other books, courses, CTFs are very popular, doing certifications afterwards. And those are definitely things you should do, right, if you're interested in doing that. I've participated, as I mentioned, a few digital forensics centered CTFs, right? There's ones from Magnet, Belkasoft, multiples of those, right? They don't happen that often. They're like a yearly thing, especially since I already have like a day job, right? It's sometimes hard to find time to do those CTFs, right? So that was one area. Another big question was how I can network, right? I didn't come from that field, how do I meet other people, get mentors, learn from them, and all the other stuff, right? As you know, right, networking is very important for any job, right? So that's true for this area. The other thing you could do to network, right, a very popular thing is to do a lot of blog posts, right, going on LinkedIn or like some people do YouTube and all the other stuff. Those are always fun. There's like these Zeltzer challenges where you try to do like a daily post on various subjects and stuff like that. And then the last question is, how can I specifically individually start contributing towards the field of digital forensics, right? So that's kind of what led me as a programmer to try to figure out like, where is that going to lead me, right? So we kind of come back to, open source tools, right? As I said, I consider my day job kind of as a programmer, and that's where I came from, right? So I'm kind of used to doing, open source projects. You contribute to them and all this stuff, and I figured, yeah. Sure. Yeah, I'm moving back, right? Okay, yeah, not a problem. So, as a programmer, doing those contributions, open source projects was kind of an area that I was comfortable with already. And I figured, hey, there's a lot of open source projects in digital forensics and incident response. Maybe I can start contributing to them. And if I do that, what can I learn or gain from doing that, right? I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of the tools. Some of them may not be open source per se, but they may have open source components. Cape isn't open source, but they have a Cape files repository that is open for contributions to do that type of stuff. You have the various leaps from Alexis Brignoni, right? You have ALEAP, iLeap, those are all for mobile forensics, parsing those things. Rapid7 and Michael Cohen, they have the Velociraptor project. If you ever played around that, it's very useful for incident response and stuff like that. Wireshark, right? That is an open source project. Same with Ghidra for reverse engineering. The list goes on and on, right? I'm sure many of you have used one at some point. You may not realize it, but they are there. The question becomes, how many of you actually have contributed to those projects, right? In some form, right? And that's kind of where I'm going to be coming from there, right? ALEAP itself, if you look at the contributors, it's only like 60 people have contributed to that project. Same with like Cape Files and Velociraptor is about 115, right? So it's a pretty small community of people who have actually like contributed and worked on those projects, right? Open source tools, right? As we talk about all these things, the transparency there. So if you're trying to learn stuff and like figure out the artifacts and stuff like that, you can look at the source code and figure out and understand where it's getting that information from, right? That's a little bit different from like closed source programs and all the other stuff. They're going to show you the artifacts, but you might not know where they came from, right? Especially as a student wanting to learn more and more of like how those artifacts work, you're going to want to know where they came from and how that tool pulled it, right? So that's that transparency. Coming back to like customizable or agile, not the software methodology, but being able to quickly do it, right? Mobile applications, all the software, it's constantly changing, right? A new version comes out. The artifact's going to change, right? The vendor application, they're going to have to spend time or wait for development time to free up to make that change, right? Some vendors may only have like a quarterly release schedule or something like that. So you're going to have to wait until they update their software to use it, right? With an open source project, potentially, if you know and you have that knowledge of that information, you could make that change and contribute it to it, like literally when you found it and stuff like that. You're going to move that bar much quicker, essentially. And then the other thing is they offer, honestly, a great way to collaborate with people, especially across the world, right? A lot of us, we're working in our small silos with our company. It's the same people we're always talking to all the time. With an open source project, you could be working with someone over, totally different time zone, halfway across the world in like Australia, something like that. You're sharing ideas and learning from them, essentially. So, but honestly, in my opinion, like the biggest thing for me is that transparency. Like I can see how that tool worked and got that artifact. It's kind of funny, like if you ever get like called into court or something like that, they may ask you, it's like, where is this coming from? Prove it, and can you explain it? And if the tool is hiding that, you may not be able to do that. That potentially is a weakness there. So, cool. So there's kind of like a few ways, general ways to contribute to like open source projects, right? We kind of talked about already, the documentation and discussion, right? Just talking to people, looking at the discussions going on and like pull requests and issues and stuff like that. This is especially important for someone starting out. Don't just like jump in there and try to like change everything in the project, right? You need to get the lay of the land, try to understand where are the maintainers going for this project, how do they like to work, right? Especially if you're going to try to contribute, you have to do your due diligence on what they're looking from you, right? To do all that stuff. Other ways to contribute is testing and validation, right? Going back to that thing where like software constantly changes, right? So let's just say, for example, ChatGPT, the desktop client, comes out with a new version or an update or something like that. Cape, if I remember correctly, has a parser for that. It may not work on the new version, right? You might test it. If you find that it doesn't work, if you can figure out what broke or what changed, right, you can make that suggestion to maybe reach out to the original author of the plugin, and you might be able to work with them to add in that capability, essentially, right? And then the last thing, right, the last one over there is the big guy, right, the pull request, right? Those are actually making those contributions, right, pushing them into the project and then getting it like accepted in, essentially, right? So all three of these are kind of interlinked, right? Because if you're doing documentation, honestly, you should put that in as a pull request at the end of the day. If you're doing testing and validation, there should be some sort of result from that, and you'll end up doing a pull request from that. So, as the little meme says, just using the forensic tool, that's great. You're going to get information and all the other stuff, but contributing to it, that's like the next step, essentially. So, cool. So, kind of like my personal journey in this whole thing, right? I kind of started with kind of some research in like Windows Notepad. That manifested itself in publishing like a tool and research on GitHub. During that research, I kind of ended up collaborating with a bunch of other people, once again across the world, looking at it, right? And that was like the light bulb in my head. It's like, oh, this is a great way to like actually learn, talk, and work with other people that I normally would never have the chance to, especially because, this is not my field that I'm working in, right? So from there, I moved on to like, I used Cape a lot, right, in my coursework and all the other stuff. So I might as well play around with that. So looked at that, did a few targets and modules. Same thing, Velociraptor, I wanted to learn more on how to use that tool. So, dove into that. Same thing. In the course of doing that, submitted a few artifacts. Again, same with ALEAP, which is an interesting one. That actually spawned off of the Belkasoft CTF that recently happened, essentially. So they had a image of a mobile phone, essentially, with IMAP email artifacts. And at the time, ALEAP wasn't able to actually parse that artifact out. Belkasoft software actually pulled that out. And I was like, it's missing from it. We might as well add it here, essentially. So that resulted in you'd have to do the research to understand where is it getting it from and write out the parser and all the other stuff for ALEAP. So honestly, CTFs are a great way to like get into it, right? If you find one that the tool doesn't parse or something like that, you can make that, right? You have a data set already for you that's been provided for the CTF. So going back, the getting started tips, right, for people, essentially, right? Honestly, you don't really have to be a developer to start with this. I'm sure many of you already know programming languages and stuff like that, but if you're just starting out, honestly, the best place to start, right, is with documentation. Documentation is so important for any sort of tool, right? People need to know how to use it and use it appropriately. And this even goes down to like, if you're looking at certain artifacts, are you understanding what you're seeing there, right? Just because a timestamp says something, is that timestamp telling you what you think it's, trying to tell you and stuff like that. So documentation is a good place to start. There's a lot of open source projects that, may not have the greatest documentation, or it has some room for improvement, or it's slightly outdated, essentially. So in the process of writing that documentation, you yourself are going to learn, or you're going to need to learn how to use the tool, obviously. But that's a good place to start. You don't really need any programming experience. You just need to know how to use the tool. The other thing is participating in those discussions. We kind of talked about it earlier, but the issues and stuff like that, bugs that people bump into, or questions they have, look at the ones that have been closed already, right? The ones that have been solved in the past, right? Because they may have come across something and didn't understand, like an artifact or a feature. And if you read that, you may see the solution and you'll end up learning from there, right? Conversely, like if you started to learn how to use it, you may see like a answer to that you could provide to someone looking for stuff like that. So it's just a great way to give back to everyone and stuff like that. And then going back to the example of testing, and I think it's working. Should I just hold it, or? Okay, yeah. Last thing is testing and validating changes and stuff like that. That's going back to the example of new versions, right? You can help do that, right? If you have that version already, you can run the tool, figure out if it's getting back to you what you expect. If it's not, you can once again work with someone to try to figure out what's going on there. So the last thing I'll kind of leave you all, I think, is with kind of like a call to action, right? So, right, Eric Zimmer with Cape Files. They've been looking for people to help update the documentation on the various plugins. That's specifically to provide documentation on the actual plugins themselves, like the artifacts, what they mean, how to actually understand what they're providing and stuff like that. They've been looking for help since 2021. It's ripe for that, right? Literally all you have to go in there is add a link to like a blog post that you've written or someone else has written on that information. Same way with Velociraptor, they have their artifact exchange. It's a really easy way to get your contribution and your foot in the door there. So, but those are only two of them. Honestly, if you have a project that you're interested in or that you want to learn more about, that's a good place to start to bring that down essentially. So, but yeah, kind of breeze through that really quickly. So if you want the slide deck, they're available there. That's kind of it for me. So if anyone has any questions, feel free. Yeah.
So, DFIR, prone to burnout. How do you find the energy after, I don't know, periods of weeks where you're working past 40 hours to, I don't know, get involved with some team rebuilders, tool,
Yeah.
just learn how to use it?
Yep. Yeah. I mean that's really rough, right? As I said, my day job has nothing to do with digital forensics, which might help, honestly, right? Like my normal job is like talking with people, like in IT and fixing those problems. I mean, honestly, for me at the moment, like this digital forensics stuff. Remember, these are projects that I'm interested in, right? Or they are artifacts that I have already found interested in my mind to want to look at, essentially. So it's almost like it's literally a side project, right? It's not really answering your question, but I would say like pick something that you're already interested in, right? Because if you're not, then yeah, that motivation is just not going to exist, right? But it doesn't make it easy, right? Like half this stuff I'm doing like when I get home, like an hour before bed, that type of stuff. I mean, the other thing to remember is like, this isn't going to be quick, right? If you're going to be working on like a contribution or something like that, don't expect yourself, like give yourself that grace. You're not going to finish in like a day, right? It could take you like a month or something like that. And then even when you submit that pull request, remember a lot of the other maintainers are also volunteers in this project. It may take another month for them to even like validate and accept your pull request, right? So it's fast, but it's not a fast world, right? So just allow yourself that grace to like not burn yourself out on that type of stuff. So cool. Yeah. Yep.
What kind of resources do you use to sort of test these tools? Like, my background is in DFI, but I'm now in the security architecture role, so I'm away from the DFI role.
Mhm.
Where you have like a lab set up. How do you sort of do that when you're doing
Yep.
open source?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a lab setup at home essentially, right? I have specifically I have a Hyper-V setup, but any type of virtualization, right? So that's specifically for like Windows desktop hosts and stuff like that. To do the mobile forensics, I ended up getting like an older Pixel phone and just rooting that essentially, and then you could pull down the data from there. It is very important if you're going to do that, really document yourself, like what steps you did to actually create that data set, right? So like, going back to like the IMAP email example, right? You're going to want to be like, okay, I sent this email at this time, this was in it, and all this other stuff, because it's going to just help you later on, figuring out those artifacts. If you don't have those notes, it's going to be a complete nightmare essentially. So yeah. Cool. I think we're good. Thank you.